As a sheriff, we are deeply ingrained in our community. We see the effects of this. The federal government, once they get past the border, they don't really deal with the effects of the human trafficking or the drug trafficking. That ends up falling on local law enforcement. Then guys like myself and my team as a sheriff, we would clean up the mess that came along with that.
What is the most evil thing you have seen?
The cartels. The cartels are the most evil. And frankly, we got some politicians in this country that are probably right up there with them. The cartels are just sheer evil. They decapitate people, cut people to pieces, harvest organs. Everything you've heard about, they do.
Have you seen children being trafficked across the border?
There's about 144,000, about 140,000 children over the last few years that came into this country unaccompanied. We were flying our helicopter along the border maybe a year before the Biden administration left office, and we could see this huge group of people coming across, so we flew our helicopter, got over top of them, realized the majority of them were kids. So we actually landed the helicopter. There was 53 people in that group. 3 of them were women, 50 of them were children, 17 years or younger. The women that were there only knew, I think they each had 1 child. So 3 of the children were accounted for. The other 47 children were unaccounted for. They were all unaccompanied minors. Many of those children were ultimately sent to addresses that they either had written on their arms or on a piece of paper. And a lot of those addresses were hundreds of children were being sent to the same address. And we failed to do the due diligence to protect these children. Here's one thing that the cartels understand. If they sell you a pill, like a fentanyl pill, they can only sell it to you one time. You take it, it's done. But what the cartels understood was not only did they have people showing up every day, paying them thousands of dollars to come across, they would then take those women and children and put them in the hard labor or sex trade. Why? Because in the sex trade, a woman or a child pays 100 times. You can sell them over and over and over again, and the cartel has done that. And our failure to secure our border, and politicians in DC and the evil cartels, they have contributed to this evilness and to the exploitation of children. And a large part of them have been over the last 4 years with all these unaccompanied minors we've seen.
What is giving these children the motivation to come across the border? Is it their parents telling them to come into the country alone? Or who's sending them across the border?
Well, it's a little bit of everything. You've got children whose parents have sent them here, thinking that they're going to send them for a better life. Maybe they wanted to send them, maybe the children's parents are already here. But a lot of them are children that were stolen by the cartels, kidnapped, or the cartels will tell families, hey, if you don't let us use your child, we're gonna kill you guys, or we're gonna kill your other sibling or your other children. So it's a little bit of everything. A lot of it is, children being kidnapped, parents sending their children up here, which is absolutely ridiculous. Parents bringing their children up to cross this country, break the law with their children in tow. Children whose parents die on the way here. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them, of reasons why the children are unaccompanied.
And how do the cartels treat the children and women that they traffic across the border?
Well, the women and the children that they bring across the border are merely like less than cattle probably to them. They're mere commodity. They are as if I gave you a piece of paper to them. It has a monetary value. That's all they care about. They get the money. They couldn't care less whether those women or children make it here. Oftentimes the payment that is rendered is being raped or paid through sex, or they are indentured when they get here to this country. And when I say indentured, hard labor, sex trafficking. So that's a lot of what happens when the cartels get their hands on people.
Have you talked to some of these women and children after they've crossed? What have they told you?
We had one story of a woman that we caught, and when we caught her, she had a baggie full of pills. And in this baggie full of pills, there was like 50 pills. Thinking that maybe it was fentanyl or something else, we said, what are these pills? And she said, well, when I was going to cross the border, I knew I'd be raped multiple times. These are morning after pills. Where did we get as a country to where we're allowing women to be raped in the name of politics because you want open borders, because your political party thinks it's best to have open borders and just let people come in here. That's the reality of having open borders, and the reality of encouraging people to come into this country illegally. Those are the types of victims we run into.
And what about the citizens? How have the people in Arizona that were in your jurisdiction while you were a sheriff affected by the crime that came across the border in the last 4 years?
Well, no, I've said for a long time, like what happens in our backyard here in Arizona will be in your front yard tomorrow across this country. If I were to line up 20 people that came out of the desert just now, none of them would stay here in Arizona. You know, almost 100% of them. Obviously not 100%, but nearly 100% of the people we came in contact with were planning on going to other places. Chicago, New York, Alabama, Iowa, California. They would always have somewhere else that they were planning on going. The reason I bring that up is because in Arizona, we get that first jumping off point. This is where the people are very first being trafficked into America, or where the drugs are first being trafficked into America. So our people in our county understood that as a sheriff's office, we had a responsibility to try to stop that human trafficking and to try to stop the drug trafficking that was coming into this country. Logistically, we weren't on the border, but we were that last line of defense. If it got past us on the I-10 or through the desert area on the south end of our county coming off the Indian reservation, it was going to get into Phoenix, and then it was going to be distributed throughout the rest of the country. So not only did our agency, the people that work there understand it, but the people in our county, because we told them what was going on, they understood how important Pinal County was in the stopping the humans and drugs being trafficked into this country.
And what does the drug smuggling look like? When you were looking for guys that were smuggling drugs, what did you look for?
All sorts of different cues, you know. What made it hard, I'll tell you, it was different under the first Trump administration because you could look for certain types of vehicles. You could look for, a lot of the times, the people that were trafficking the drugs were either already gang members here in this country, cartel members living here, or they had just crossed over. What happened though under the last 4 years is the cartels had so much money. They had people showing up to the border every day with 5,000, 10,000, wanting to come across here. So the cartel, not only did they have a ton of money, they had a ton of people that they could use as pawns in this drug trafficking game they're doing, or business that they're running, awful business as it is. But they were also, and the most concerning thing is, they were actually able to employ Americans. And oftentimes they targeted American youth to assist them in either the trafficking of humans into this country or the trafficking of drugs. So it looked very different the first 4 years I was a sheriff as opposed to the last 4 years. Last 4 years, we saw a lot of Americans that were actually engaged in that. As a matter of fact, if you go to Washington, the left will tell you, oh, it's Americans being arrested for trafficking in humans and drugs, as if that's okay, as if that makes this better. And what I would say to them is, how do you even say that? What this says to me is that you've allowed the cartels to make so much money that they are now engaging American citizens, including mostly our youth, to engage in the trafficking of humans and drugs because they're able to pay them so much money. That is what is very concerning to me. And one more thing, it's not an America problem anymore. You know, these cartels may have started off as ragtag, little, shanties in the middle of nowhere. Some of that still exists, but they are now multinational, transnational, global organizations, criminal organizations. They're in 54 different countries. They sell methamphetamines, fentanyl all over the globe. America just happens to be one of their closest clients, but we certainly are not their only client. We probably still are the lion's share of it, but because of the power they've gained, they are now in 54 different countries.
Can you describe the capabilities of the cartels?
Well, the fact that they're able to sell in 54 different countries. They're able to traffic drugs and humans into this country. They brought in, by our government's admission, 11 million people tried to come into this country. I think that number is more realistically around 15, 16 million in the last 4 years. What kind of organization is able to bring 15, 16 million people across somebody's border when it's illegal. Or the drugs that we've seen. You know, fentanyl has become the leading cause of death in America amongst the ages of 18 and I think 35. That has become the leading cause of death in America. So obviously they're very proficient in what they do. They're billion-dollar organizations, maybe even trillions, depending on how much money they've made over the last few decades. But they certainly have the resources to be able to solve any logistical problem, and they can use force. They don't play by the same rules we play by in law enforcement. We live and die by the Constitution. These folks don't care one bit about that. They don't care about our laws. They don't care about the rules. They care about bringing their product into this country and making money. And they've done very well at that. And they have all of the guns and the armament and the tanks and the troops to be able to protect those billion-dollar organizations that they've created.
Have you talked to any of the parents affected by this drug smuggling?
Of course. We've done video after video. We tell those stories all the time of parents finding their 15-year-old child dead in the bed, or dad finds his daughter dead in the shower. Or, you know, I think it used to be that most Americans had not been affected. You know, if you had a family member who had gotten deep into drugs or maybe lost their life from drugs, you were an anomaly. And then as the years went on, it was more and more people. Now with fentanyl and with the pills they're bringing in and the types of drugs they're bringing in, now it's every family has been affected. My family, everybody's family has been affected by fentanyl or some type of drug in some way. And so, I mean, it's had a tremendous impact, and we deal with this on a daily basis.
Are you willing to talk about how your family was affected by fentanyl?
Sure. Look, I had a son who I'm not perfect. I had 5 kids. We tried to raise them all right. You know, my wife and I have never even drank a sip of alcohol, let alone engage in any type of drugs. We had a son who kind of got off the path and started getting into drugs, marijuana, and other things. And it was years of dealing with our son addicted to drugs, to the point where we said, you can't drive our cars. You know, we had him move out for a while. We brought him back. We did everything we could to try to help him. At one point, he actually took one of our cars while we were gone. And not far from here, from my house, he hit a guy on a bike. And fortunately, the guy did not die, but the guy was severely injured. And my son was charged with ag assault with a deadly weapon. You would think that that would be enough to clean him up, but it wasn't. It wasn't until many months later. It wasn't until, honestly, when he and his wife, his fiance, found out that they were going to be having a baby. And the way that happened is, my son, we had just come back from a long family vacation. You could tell my son and my daughter-in-law, they were struggling. You could tell they were really withdrawing from drugs. And we got home and they disappeared. Turns out they had gone to a hotel that her dad had rented out for, that's a whole nother reason, but it was a good reason. Anyway, they go to the hotel, and my son doesn't see his fiance or my daughter-in-law for a bit. So he actually goes in, barges his way into the bathroom, finds her laying on the ground, dying of a fentanyl poisoning. So he drags her, pulls her up on the bed, and starts to do CPR. He's trying to call 911, and the phone's not working. So he steps outside the room to make the phone call. Well, you know how the hotels are, the door closes, boom. Now he's stepped outside, knowing that his fiance is inside the room dying from fentanyl, and just in sheer panic. The police show up, they kick the door down, they go in, they're able to save her. And that was what changed my son and my daughter-in-law. And from that point on, they got cleaned up. My son ended up spending 6 months in my jail for hitting the guy on the bike. And but he had already been clean for a long time. He had his daughter. So we felt it, like we saw firsthand, just the impact it can have on a family. We were fortunate that our kids were able to turn their lives around, get cleaned up. Many families are not. And so I fight every day, or I fought as a sheriff, and I'm still very vocal, even though I'm not a sheriff anymore. I'm trying to fight every day to bring awareness to the fact that we have to secure our borders. We have to be able to protect our families, our American families, from the dangers of drugs, from the dangers of human trafficking, and from the crime that might come with those who would come into this country and wish ill will on our American citizens.
Do you know anything about the spiritual beliefs of the cartel members? Like, how do they think and what are their motivations?
Well, believe it or not, they're actually religious. You know, they have a ton of saints, but they also have saints like during Easter, we would always see Easter or Christmas, we would see a downturn in the trafficking because they wanted to respect those holidays. But at the same time, they've got their saints. The Jesus Malverde is the patron saint of drug trafficking, or Santa Muerte. They've got all these different saints that protect them, or at least they think protects them, as they traffic humans and drugs into this country.
So there's this saint of drug trafficking, and then what is this Santa Muerta?
Well, it's the patron saint of whatever they do, trafficking humans, drugs, all the nastiness they do. The Santa Muerte, you'll see it on the worst of the worst. You'll see a skeleton, looks like a grim reaper with a sickle. That's typically the Santa Muerte. But they are religious people. They have a belief system. The problem is that they also use that belief system to justify their actions and their behavior. And they do it through saints like Malverde and Santa Muerte.
Does human sacrifice fit into that belief system at all?
Look, I can't tell you firsthand. I mean, you hear these stories all the time. I would have to believe that when you worship something like Santa Muerte, there probably is some level. I mean, I don't like to, I wish I could, I don't wish I could tell you firsthand. But I have to believe that some level of that probably does exist.
Do you see this at all as a spiritual battle?
I've been saying for a long time, this is a spiritual battle. This is a battle of good and evil. Over the last several decades, you know, we've seen the deterioration of this country, and it's really been about our distancing ourselves from God and what is good and what is right in this country. We've become self-absorbed, where we feel like, and ultimately the last thing for battle of good and evil is, what good is about freedom. Our ability to exercise freedom of choice, to be the best we can be, to become closer to God. But also with that, like any freedom, comes the opposite side, where you can be very evil and you can hurt other people. And we're seeing a lot of that in this world. And people are at odds. And I think that the way we restore that is God and the Constitution.
Why do you think we're seeing this increase in evil? I mean, the cartels are basically sufficing a need and appetite of Americans that are buying these children, that are buying the drugs. Why do you think there's such an appetite for that?
That's, you know, like anybody who reads the scriptures knows that this has been prophesied. You know, you read Revelation. If you're a God-fearing person, you know that Christ is going to come again at some point. And we just celebrated Easter, where we celebrate the fact that Christ overcame death and sin. And now we're at this another spiritual battle, the climax of a spiritual battle. And cartels are a pawn for evil in this spiritual battle for the souls of men and women in this country and all across this globe. And it's going to take people that are solid in their belief, in their faith, and knowing that it's more important to stand with God, even if you stand alone, that's the most important thing.
Man, thank you for doing what you do.